Morning, folks. I've been given the title, It's All in the Game. And I suppose to talk about myself, I started coaching back in 1977 when I was a student as an undergraduate in physical education. And obviously, times have changed enormously since 1977. But I went to a lot of courses during my early years when I was in college. But I learned more from taking the Scottstown under-16 team and minor teams. And if you want to be a good coach, you've got to coach. As Seb Coe's father said, if you want to run fast, you better train fast. And that's the bottom line. You can come to courses all you want, but you've got to get out and coach. And I've been very lucky, as I said, to have successfully worked with other great coaches in winning our 4 Sigersons. And really for me, because of what we do in DCU, many of our players have gone on to be part of the current Dublin team. And all of the players on the screen have actually played and won Sigersons in DCU. And it's something we're extremely proud of in DCU. And more importantly, of the 5 All-Irelands that have been won in the last 5 years, they've all been captained by DCU players. Brian Cullen, now Dr. Brian Cullen, Michael Murphy and Stephen Cluxton, who's captain 3. And that's a credit, I think, not just to me and DCU, but I'll talk a little bit more about our coaching staff and our coaching philosophy and why I think we have been so successful over the past decade. My students over the years give me lots of sayings that I put up on my wall in my office. And one of them is this quote. And it says, "Ancaro Emporio." And the quote means always learning. And it comes from a guy you all know. His name is Michelangelo. But amazingly, he said this in 1562 when he was 85 years of age. Can you imagine, in the 1500s, he lived to 88 years of age. That's around 120 today. But at 85 years of age, a guy that took a piece of marble and sculptured this in 2 years, a guy that lay on his back and drew the Sistine Chapel in 4 years. And he's telling us that we're always learning. And that is true as coaches. That's the mantra that we have to take, that we're always learning. Scotty Bowman was a famous hockey coach in the United States, and he talks about adaptability. I found out that if you're going to win games, you better be ready to adapt, and good coaches have to be adaptable. In addition, you have to embrace change. If you don't embrace change, life is going to pass you by. So the ability to be adaptable and to change is very, very important if you want to be a successful coach. This is the last Monaghan team that I coached in 1988 that won the Ulster Championship. And I'm just thinking about this morning and how I trained them and how I was taught when I was a physical education student, how I was taught to teach. It's turned on its head 180 degrees. Everything I was told to do, it's the total opposite now. But I've had to change, I've had to adapt. And I think as coaches, we have to adapt. And if you look at all the medical journals and scientific journals that are out there, you actually couldn't keep up with them. It's very, very difficult. In this world where we have social media and more information than we've ever had in the history of mankind. So what is my philosophy as a coach? There are 4 underpinning themes that underpin my coaching philosophy. One is I take a games-based approach to coaching. Secondly, I want my players to be technically proficient, tactically adaptable, excellent problem solvers, and excellent decision makers. That's what I want from my players. And how do you do that? You do it by taking a games-based approach. I don't want to embarrass these 2 guys, but these 2 guys have had a tremendous influence on my career. I think you all know Pat Daly. And I mean, I've never seen a guy who pushes the boundaries so much. There are lots of things that I disagree with Pat, but he's always pushing the boundaries. And you all know Dr. Michael Whelan, who I believe is the godfather of coaching in this country currently. And I have dinner most days with Mickey Whelan. You learn more in 10 minutes than I learn in any textbook. But for Pat, he pushed myself and Mickey a few years ago about developing some sort of a game strategy. And actually from that, we developed the Go games, have evolved from Mickey's PhD work. And it was because Pat wanted a different model. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next 30 minutes or so. So this is what most people think that success is like. It's a pretty linear pattern. You become a coach and you go all the way, and that's how success arrives. Or unfortunately, that's what success is really like. And I'm sure we all can concur with that. Secondly, there is no one size fits all. There's no one size fits all. And that's very, very important, particularly for those who are dealing with children. Let me give you an example. This is a muscle sample here, okay? And here is, this is the same muscle damaged after exercise, as you can see, clear damage to the muscle. And what we can do is, once your muscle gets damaged, these proteins can leak out into your blood and we can measure it. And this is a study we did with Dermot Sheridan and Kevin Riley last summer with a group of minor players in Dublin. We got them to play a game of Gaelic football, and we measured, okay? We measured the amount of this creatine kinase in their muscle before, after, 12, 36, and 48 hours after the game. Now even, and this is just for your own information, oddly enough, there's the normal range what it should be. Before the game even started, the kids in these two minor teams were 156% above where they should be, which means they had muscle damage, and that's a worrying thing. But that's not the reason that I showed you this slide. This was the change. It increased 57% after the game, up to 71, and then back to still 22% increased, still 22% increased 36 hours after the game. But what I showed you is this. This is each individual player's measurement of creatine kinase. Look at the distribution. Here's the normal range. In fact, these were the kids in the normal range at each time points. But look at, even before the game, look at the variability. All the kids didn't respond the same. They were all different. And we have to treat kids as individuals if we're going to be effective coaches. This shows the exact same data, but what we have here is the pre-game, and here's 12 hours. Here's everyone before the game, here's 12 hours afterwards. It's all over the place. They all respond differently. And just another study just to show you how we all respond differently, and we have to think of each individual kid or player that we have as an individual. This is the mitochondria. This is a cell in your body, and these are the individual. This is where you produce energy. So we did a study a number of years ago where we took muscle biopsies, and we had the students undertake high-intensity or endurance training, and we wanted to see how much of this mitochondria could we produce. And as you can see, after training, there was an increase. But there was a tremendous variability among players. They all didn't change the same. So if you put a player on an exercise program, they're not all going to change the same. It's the same with coaching. They don't all improve at the same rate. So for someone, I work in the area of molecular genetics and heart disease. So I do a lot of work and I publish a lot of papers in molecular genetics. But I think we place too much emphasis on that. And I think as young coaches, and particularly in Gaelic games, we erroneously believe that sporting excellence is based on talent. And I want to tell you that's wrong. Now take a look at that statement, because that's a profound statement. We erroneously believe that attaining sporting excellence hinges on talent. I'd like you to tell me which of these players, okay, is going to become an elite player. Because I can guarantee you the answer is we don't know. Because if you look at long-term success in sport, it's dependent on many factors. It's difficult to predict at an early age with a high degree of accuracy. And talent ID models have very low predictive value. Talent ID is very poor. You didn't think you'd see Amadeus Mozart at today's conference. But here he is. This was a child prodigy. This was one of the greatest musicians ever to live. Why was he so brilliant? Why was he a prodigy? Well, actually, I don't think he was a prodigy. I actually think he was a late developer, believe it or not. And here's why. His father, Leopold Mozart, was also a famous composer and a good musician in his own right. He wrote the definitive textbook on teaching music in 1652, the year that his son was born. Mozart also had a sister, Amadeus Mozart had a sister, who also played music. And he himself started to play music when he was 3 years of age. He was taught by one of the best teachers in the world at the time who was a musician, and he had a sister who was a musician. By the time he was 8, he had practiced for more than 5,000 hours. He wrote his first the first 5 piano concertos before he was 8. He wrote the next 3 before he was 12. None of them were original pieces. They're imitations of other people's work. He wrote his first really brilliant piece of music his 9th piano concerto when he was 21. He had been playing music for 18 years. He wasn't a prodigy. He was a late developer. After 18 years of playing, he wrote his first piece of original music. So in fact, it wasn't because he had some innate gifted talent. It's because he had purposeful practice for 18 years. And I think 18 years of purposeful practice, we should be a pretty good musician after that, regardless of who we are. Tiger Woods won his first major at 21 years of age. His father put his first golf club into his hand when he was 11 months. He was chipping out of the bunker when he was 3. He was 21 when he won it. He was playing for 21 years. He wasn't a prodigy. He'd been doing purposeful practice for 21 years. And the really telltale one is this guy. This guy is an educational psychologist called Laszlo Polzar. And he said children have extraordinary potential and it's up to society to unlock it. And he believed in something called the practice theory of expertise. He lived in Hungary and he married a lady called Carla. And before he married Carla, he told her that whatever children he had, they were going to become the best in the world. They were going to pick something and they were going to become the best. He'd decide what it was going to be. So they had 3 children, okay? And what he decided was he didn't want to take music or sport because that was purely subjective. He picked an activity where there was an objective way of assessing it. He picked chess. And he said, my 3 daughters are going to become the best in the world and they're all going to become grandmasters. Okay? So what he did was he carved out pieces of the chessboard, and he put them along with the toys. And the kids would take them out. Then he started putting this big chessboard on the floor. He threw it on the floor, and the kids started playing. They were intrinsically motivated to play, and he got them excited about playing chess. These are the 3 daughters, Sophia, Susan, and Judith. As children, this is them as adults. And I'll just take the youngest, Judith. Okay? Judith, in 1988, became the world under-12 champion. In 1991, she became the youngest male or female grandmaster in the history of chess. She's the world number 1 for 20 years. She's defeated the greatest male players ever to play the game, and she's considered the greatest chess player of all time. Her father didn't know the first thing about chess. Purposeful practice. If you want an example of purposeful practice, there it is. Every single child that you take to your pitch, whether it's camogie, hurling, football, they have innate talent. It's up to you through purposeful practice, and that's my job, to tell you what type of practice they should undertake. So really, in effect, if you look at the results of his work, superior ability is often taken as evidence of talent rather than lots of hidden practice. And it's the same with Tiger Woods, and it's the same with Mozart. They practiced purposeful practice for many years. In fact, they were all late developers. Good example is Wayne Gretzky, called the Great One, probably the greatest ice hockey player of all time. And a quote, I wasn't naturally gifted in terms of size and speed. Everything I did in hockey, I worked for. The highest compliment you could pay me is to say that I worked hard every day. That's how I came to know where the puck was before it even got there. What a profound. He worked hard, he practiced. He didn't come out of his mother's womb with an ice hockey stick. He wasn't that good. Like all the great players, regardless of what the sport is, they practiced. Purposeful practice. Secondly, there is no evidence of a fast track for high achievers. High achievers are not fast track. They just work harder than everyone else. That's why they're high achievers. Opportunity is necessary for success. So if you don't play your kids and we don't give them the opportunity, they're not going to be successful. You don't know who is going to be successful, but you can provide an environment to make sure that whatever talent they have, it can be maximized. And finally, if as a coach you believe that attaining excellence hinges on talent, you are likely to give up on children if they show insignificant early promise. And it happens far too often in Gaelic games, because it's about selecting the perceived best and neglecting the rest at a very young age. And there's no one in this room who can identify a child who's going to be an outstanding senior adult player. No one. If you do, come out and chat with me. We'll win the Nobel Prize together, because no one knows. The other saying that I have in my office that a student gave me is in Irish, and I don't speak a lot of Irish, so I had to get them to explain it to me. It's Mulanoga agus Chucky. What does that mean? Praise the young, and they will flourish. And it is so important. Even the ones that you think don't have the innate talent, they probably have it. But with the right practice, you bring it out of them. You make sure that they can develop that talent. So practice and not talent is really what matters when it comes to optimizing performance. And the issue is, what type of practice should we be doing? That's the big question. Well, in our sport, we tend to use what's called a technique-based approach in most clubs, where the primary focus is on optimizing technique and fitness. We use drills, okay, and this neglects the role of the game environment if we just keep doing drills. And we assume that if we do drills, it's just going to transfer into a game. Let's do drills and then play a game. It's not that simple. So here's someone doing a straight line drill. How does that relate to what happens in the real world? How does doing a simple drill up and down the field, you could actually close your eyes, a robot could do it. You don't need a human to do it, because you could program the robots just to do the drills. And these are what we call closed motor skills. These are performed in a stable, predictable environment where the performer decides when it's going to start. I'll give you a few examples. Tennis swing, that's a close. Snooker. Puck out. You have total control. That's a closed skill. Same in hurling. Okay? These are all closed skills. Taking a free kick is a closed skill, although that closed skill can be very, very, very important when there's 10 seconds to go in an All-Ireland final and the score is 14 each. So closed skills are important, but they're only a small part of our game. If you take a look at Gaelic games, the relationship between the player and the situation around them is very, very dynamic. Our players perform skills in conditions that are unpredictable and constantly changing. That's what they play in. And this requires what we call contextual processing. It's about game sense. You have to teach them a game sense. They could have all the skill in the world, but if they don't have game sense, it's absolutely no good to them. So players really, as they move up the ladder, are going to be constrained by their capacity to process information. What do I mean by contextual processing? Here's a player. He's now perceiving, he has the ball, he's perceiving what's happening in his environment. He now has to make a decision on what he sees, and based on that decision, he has to act. And we refer to that as perception-action coupling. And that's what happens every single time there's a game play. It's perception-action coupling. The player's on the ball, the player's off the ball. They have to perceive, make a decision, and act on that. You don't develop those capacities doing straight-line drills. It's just not possible. So what we have to do is empower players to make decisions based on spatial awareness and pattern recognition under pressure. That's really what we need to do when we talk about a games-based approach. Here's a player. He's after receiving the ball. What he's doing, he's perceiving, looking at his environment. He's now going to make a decision, and he's going to act on that. There's perception-action coupling in a game. That's the real world. The issue is, if he decides to kick the ball, okay, here's two examples. There's a person kicking the ball. They're kicking the ball two totally different ways. There's a million ways to kick a football. In fact, you will never kick the ball or hit a puck the same way twice in your life. There'll be a different angle, different force. It's never exactly the same. So why would straight line running develop all these different techniques? You have to put them in the situation that you have to impose it upon them, that they have to figure out ways to develop these kicking techniques that allows them to use them in a game situation. Another player here, a hurler, he's looking up. What's he doing? He's now perceiving the environment. He's going to act, okay? He's going to make a decision, and he's going to act on that. So basically, I'm not saying that technique is not important. Technique is important, okay? Good technique is critically important for performance. However, deciding what to do, how to do it, and when to do it is just as important. And poor decision-making rather than poor technical execution is more likely to be the cause of error in games than your technical ability. So open motor skills are motor skills performed in unpredictable environments, and that's what we should be promoting, and promoting it through a games-based approach. So open skills, you have more game-like decisions, you have higher cognitive, you have to think more processing, and it's more demanding for the individual. So what are the characteristics of expert performance? They can perform intuitively, under pressure in competition. Secondly, they can recognize and easily recall patterns of play. They can accurately select the correct option. So when they perceive, they can select the correct option. They're great players. And they can do it very rapidly. And they make decisions rapidly and effectively. How do they do this? By extracting information from related experience stored in long-term memory, by playing games. They've been in this situation so many times because they've been conditioned through playing games. And again, another quote from the New York Times relates to Wayne Gretzky. Ice hockey frequently looks like a game of chaos, a bit like hurling. But amid the mayhem, Gretzky can discern the game's underlying pattern and flow and anticipate what's going to happen faster and in more detail than anyone else in the building. And we refer to that as the time paradox. It looks as though he has more time than anyone else in the ball because he can read the game. And you're not going to read the game doing drills. You read the game by playing the game, putting conditions that allows players. And it's demanding for players. It's difficult for you as a coach. It's easy to set up a drill. But when you have to think about this, it makes it a lot more difficult. Good example, one of the greatest hurlers ever to play. Everything was so easy. And in my own experience over the last number of years, this guy here, Alan Brogan, I was just saying to Mickey Whelan yesterday, every time he was training, I could never understand why he was always on his own and always getting the ball. He just had this innate ability, this brilliant ability to read the game and to always be 3 seconds. He wasn't nowhere near the fastest guy on the team, but he was the smartest player on the team. He was our Wayne Gretzky in 2011. So if we take a look at the games-based model, okay, the primary focus is on discovery learning in a game context. You should be providing conditioned games. The level of difficulty should be sufficient to challenge each player to seek improvements through practice. And it should be intrinsically motivating. They will love playing games. And in fact, if you're intrinsically motivated, that will ensure that people will continue to play our games. If they love coming and they love playing and they love playing the games, they will certainly come back for more. So let's take a look at the model. Here's our players. We can manipulate our conditions in a game situation, and we can manipulate the environment. What conditions can we manipulate? Well, there's a few small conditions that you can manipulate. The duration of games, the number of players. It could be one team even, one team uneven, scoring zones, playing rules. You've done all of this before, but you can manipulate all of those. And let me give you a few examples. In the first study that Mickey Whelan did for his PhD, he took a group of under 14 players and he had them play 15 aside and 7 aside. Okay? Each player had 320 square meters each. So they had no more room in the 7-aside game than they had in the 15-aside game. And he looked at selected skills, all of these skills. He looked at various team possessions, and then he looked at enjoyment and perceived competence. But here's what he found. In the 7-aside game, they have far more touches. Every time you have a touch, what do you have to do? Perceive, make a decision, and act every single time. So in the small-sided games, they were getting far, far more opportunities for this. And in the small-sided games, obviously, there were more catches, more passes, more scoring attempts. And what he also did was, he took, in the 7-aside game, the 6 outfield players, they also played in the 15-aside game. And he looked at their contribution in the 15-aside game in relation to scoring, and how many scoring attempts they got when they were playing in the 15-aside game. So here's the 6-aside game here, or the 7-aside game. Here's the 6 outfield players. They had 21 scoring attempts. Player 1 had 9, player 2 had 5, player 3 had 4, player 4 had 2, 1, and player 6 didn't have any. When they played the 15-aside game, of all those 6 players in total, they had a total of 3 scoring attempts, and all scoring attempts were from 1 player. The most important skill in our game is putting the goddamn ball over the bar in the back of the net. And they get far more opportunities in those small games. Also, in the small-sided games, it was physiologically more demanding for the players. Now, I don't know if you know, but Gaelic football pitches are pretty big compared to hockey, rugby, basketball. In fact, in Croke Park, if you look at the dimensions of Croke Park and divide it by the number of players, 30 players, each player is 460 square meters each. That's exactly. And you think when you set up your conditions, your practice, you have to think about the size of the pitch. Are you giving the players more space, less space? So what Mickey did in another of his studies, These were under 16 players, and he took 15 aside. This time he took 9 aside rather than 7 aside. So this was a normal, and the pitch that it was up in Monaghan, we don't have big pitches, we can't afford it up there, but there was 400 square meters per player on the pitch that we played on. And then he played 9-a-side games. He played 3 of them. We took the average, so we played a 9-a-side game with 400 square meters per player and a 9-a-side game with 300 square meters per player. And what did he find? Well, here's the results of the skills. As you can see, higher number of catches, passes, scoring attempts in the small-sided games compared to the larger games. Again, look at the total touches. Every time you played a smaller conditioned game, you had more touches on the ball, more time to think. And that's what it's about, that perception, action, coupling. Again, higher number of catches, passes, and scoring attempts, and a greater physiological demands. So that's the conditions. And you can the type of feedback, the equipment that you use, you can manipulate the environment or constrain the environment in any way you want. The other thing you can change is the environment, and that's where you come in. That's the philosophy. What's your club philosophy? Is your club philosophy is that every single child under 14 gets to play meaningful games, X number of meaningful games, or is about winning the under 14 Féile? That's a philosophy. That's a culture. And I know in DCU, this photograph was taken at the final whistle in 2015. But what people see is the performance. It's the iceberg effect. You see what's above the water. You don't see what's above the water. That's the culture, okay? And it's called the iceberg effect. And these are all the transferable, intangible things that I want our players to develop. That's the culture of DCU. What's the culture of your club? Because you can't say, well, we're going to have a games-based approach, but it has to be underpinned by something. And I should also say, in the current world, unfortunately, our CEO examinations don't measure any of those. And when it comes to the work today in the modern world, that's what employers are looking for. Those transferable skills that you get from playing our games. So you're enriching kids way beyond just sport. You're increasing their probability of employment in later years if we can develop these transferable skills. And maybe the Department of Education will see that sometime. Secondly, the coaching staff. How do you all sing from the same hymn sheet? This is the coaching staff that won the Sigerson 2 years ago. And I want to point out just a few things. Every single member of the coaching staff has a direct link to DCU. Every single one. And I want to point out 2 in particular. This is Tony Diamond, who was my defensive coach. He's the best defensive coach I have ever known. And if you want to be mollycoddled, Tony wasn't your guy. But if you want to be a good defensive player, he just lived and breathed. He did the sort of stuff that no coach wants to do. And obviously, in a few moments, Mick Bohan is going to be up talking to you. And they've played a huge role. In fact, a far bigger role. I get the credit. They're the brilliant coaches that take our games-based approach and put it into effect. And also, I've been very, very lucky to work with this guy, an iconic figure in Irish sport. And again, just to have Sean Boylan around, it's just amazing. And it goes back to what Michelangelo said, always learning. Boy, when you have a guy like that around. So we're very, very lucky. And that's the culture that you try to develop. And you get all of these together, it increases the likelihood that you are going to develop the correct approach, this perception-action coupling. That's a pretty quote from, I believe, the best manager in Irish sport ever. I like to see players making decisions individually and collectively because it shows they're thinking like leaders. That's what we have to do. That's what the game-based approach. In a drill, you don't have to think. You just run in a straight line. There's no perception, there's no action, there's no coupling. You just perform on an 8 scale and you just keep doing it the same way. So what are the advantages of a games-based model? It develops technical and tactical skills in game situations. It provides opportunities for active problem solving, and it empowers players to make contextualized decisions in a game situation, in a very dynamic situation. And finally, it replicates the movement demands, the physiological intensity, and technical requirements of competitive play. That doesn't happen in a drill. That's the game-based approach. Let's take an example of the last one, okay, the physiological intensity. There's some of the physiological parameters that we develop in all of our players. But agility is a very, very important component. You need to be agile. You've got to have a nice balance. And what we normally do to develop agility, we get guys running around poles, okay? So, if you take a look at that and you take a look at this, there's a guy after slipping the player. Oh, sorry, wrong one. He's after slipping him by. Brilliant dummy. Now, do you think running around poles is going to help that kid become better at making sure he doesn't fall for the dummy the next time? That's the question. And the issue is, this is pre-planned. This type of running around poles, okay, it's called pre-planned agility. And basically what it is, it's the ability to change direction and start and stop quickly. It's pretty straightforward. But in the real world, this is reactive agility. Okay, you're reacting to a stimulus. A player's trying to give you the dummy. Well, if you haven't done it a million times in a game, how are you going to react in a game if all you've done is run around poles with your head down? I tell you, if you run around poles with your head down, it does, and you do it 1,000 times, you become very good at running around a pole with your head down. But it's not very good at reacting to the real world situation of what happens in a game. So here, if you take a look, and you look at agility, this is change of direction. There is a physiological component, but there's a perceptual decision-making component about anticipation, pattern recognition, all of these things. That only happens in a game. And I'm only highlighting this to again show you the importance of game. If you want to develop, the biggest waste, I would love to see 90% of the money being spent on GPS systems and the other nonsense fitness spent in coaching, and it would revolutionize our games. We are spending far too much money and time on physical conditioning and not near enough time on our games. Because if we got the games right, there'd be no need for the physical conditioning. Because that's the best way. If you want to condition someone, have them play the game by a mile. So I think we need to, all that money that we're wasting, let's put it back in and let's become world leaders in coaching science. Because I think that's the next big wave, and that's what's going to really bring our association on. So what's the role of the coach in all of this? Okay? Well, it's up to the coach to determine or to create a practice that allows players to learn implicitly. They don't realize it. And Mickey Whelan loves this term about implicit learning. All of a sudden, you're learning and you don't realize it. You go out the next day, geez, I did that, I didn't realize. I'm making better decisions. It's occurring implicitly, not explicitly. And that's the way you want them to learn. You have to manipulate the constraints or the conditions of practice to make sure they're appropriate level, okay, and to ensure that you're going to have improvement in skills. It should be goal-oriented. So each time you go out, is the purpose of the game, is it to retain possession? Is it about the transition? Are we going to really focus on transitioning from offense or transitioning to defense? Or is it going to be about where we're going to have the engagement line? You have to decide all of those things. But make sure there's a purpose and there's a goal orientation to just don't have a random game. There has to be a purpose to the game. And what you should do is you should guide and shape rather than dictate the practice or the training. The more your voice is heard, the less coaching you're doing, the less learning they're undertaking. The less you hear yourself, the more learning is taking place. If that's one message you want to get from today, that's it. If you're shouting, they're not learning. If you have your mouth shut, they're learning. Believe you me, they're learning. And you should also rely on skillful observation and player questioning. Okay, we call this discovery learning. So basically, you do a warm-up, dynamic, specific. You play a game. You take them back in. You question them. You challenge them about what has happened. You go back into a game. You further question and challenge them. You progress the game, maybe make it a little bit more difficult. You repeat the above cycle, and you do a warm-down. And you can focus on technique only when it improves the game or the ability of the individual to play in the game. Then you go and you work on a specific technique. But the game should be the focus of your intervention. I love this. This is a quote that says, okay, so we get with a partner and practice the chest pass. Remember to keep your elbows out. Step forward as you extend your arms towards your partner, and once you can pass accurately, we will try and put it into a game. Now, what is a child here? Blah, 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 game. That's the reality, guys. We've all been there. Jesus Christ, would you shut up and let us play? We've all been there. We think that's chaos. That's not chaos to a child. That's a child's world. We want to impose our world on a child. That's not chaos. That's exactly what a child wants to do. A child wants to play. A child will find its way, no matter where you are in the world. In a squalor, children, I don't see any cones, don't see any drills. All I see is children playing. No matter where you go in the world, no matter what the sport is, the children will play. They'll not do drills. They want to play. And that's how you get better. They enjoy playing. And if you look within Ireland, in previous generations, we played out on the streets. Okay, we spent considerable time in unstructured activities such as street games or playing on the green. What did this do? It was fun, it encouraged improvisation, and nurtured the development of sporting expertise. We're trying to go back to the past. We have engineered this innate, unstructured activity out of our lives. And the majority of this was organized without any adult involvement. Full participation was guaranteed. The number and the skill level of the players in each team were altered to ensure that they're competitive. And playing area and playing rules were modified. We've all done that. Then all of a sudden you bring in an adult and the whole thing changes. We've got to win, we've got to have cones. No, I'm not prepared to put another player up there. No, or swap players because one team's stronger than the other. That just doesn't happen. So games-based approaches provide for the development of game appreciation, perceptual and tactical awareness, and strategic knowledge, which contribute to decision-making, which I think, as Brian Cody said, is very, very important. And secondly, game-based approach to coaching facilitates the transfer of skills to match and play and ensure greater relevance to competitive performance. And that's what we want. At the end of the day, is it going to improve performance in the real world in competition? Are these kids, camogie, ladies football and hurling, can we get them to this level? That's your job. Your job isn't to throw them out of the sport, it's to keep them in the sport. And to ensure that they get to this level, the games-based approach, I believe, is the way to go. I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to finish with this. And I apologize for doing it. But as my role in physiology and in health, I want to give you a really good reason why you should keep every kid in sport. And here's what it is. Our children today live in a society that we just couldn't even imagine. Okay? They're in a communications revolution. They have everything at their fingertips. In fact, if you look at the lunar module that landed on the moon, there's more computer power in an iPhone. It's amazing how technology has revolutionized their life. But they've lived very stressful lives. We have mental stress. We have the stress of drugs, smoking, alcoholism, and diet. These are all pervasive problems that affect society. And when a child comes to you and to your facility in your club, you have a responsibility, because we pride ourselves on being a social organization. You have a responsibility from a health perspective to ensure that these kids stay within our clubs. And I'll give you a reason why. All of these gadgets is engineering activity out of our lives. This is what kids spend most of the time doing. In fact, I love this cartoon. This is 1976. This is my mother pulling me in by the ear in the 60s. Situation today is the opposite. They're throwing them out of the house. Okay? That's the world that we live in. And to finish off, all the kids that you have, they should be doing 60 minutes a day of moderate or vigorous intensity activity. Currently, 12% of Irish 10 to 18-year-olds, or 1 in 8, is meeting that criteria. We have a huge obesity problem. And when a child's obese, I can guarantee you 99% of them will be an obese adult. They will never lose the weight. You have a role, believe it or not. You may not realize it. And to finish off, this was a study we completed. These are your arteries that supply your brain. They're called your carotid arteries. And as you get older, plaque begins to grow. So here's one of the arteries, and plaque starts to grow in the arteries. And we can measure that using ultrasound imaging. We can measure the amount of plaque in the arteries, very simply using ultrasound imaging. And a study we did recently, we compared low-fit, moderate-fit, and high-fit individuals. And we compared the amount of plaque in the carotid arteries supplying their brain. And we found that the low-fit had significantly more plaque in the arteries supplying their brain. In fact, this is what we found, that the fitter you were, the higher your VO2 max, the less plaque you had. The lower your VO2 max or fitness, the more you had. But what else did we find? We found that 64% of the low-fit individuals were either overweight or obese. 75% of the low-fit had high blood pressure. 62% were insulin resistant, which means they're one step away from diabetes. And the average age, 87%, the average age of the blood vessels supplying the brain was between 55 and 60 years of age. The participants in the study were 15-year-old transition year students. So the next time you have a kid in your club and you decide he's not good enough to play for you, maybe from a health perspective, there's a good reason to keep him. Here's why. At 15 years of age, these kids, the time bomb is ticking. They have already increased their risk for a stroke and for vascular dementia. And they're 15 years of age. So we have a role, not just from a sporting, but also from a health perspective. And I really, really want to impress that on you. So finally, Gaelic games may not be for everyone, but the opportunity to try should be. That's a message I want you to take home. Secondly, it is much better for children and adolescents to play our games poorly than to watch others play it well. Okay? And second and last slide, I think, be bold. It really is an innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's not been done before. Be bold. Go where no one has gone before. People give Jim McGuinness such a hard time. I admire the guy for what he did. I think it was innovative what he did. He did what he had to do. And it made us all think, and I think the game will be enriched because of it long term. And the final quote that a student has given me over the years is this quote. Oh, sorry, before I say that, these are 3 books that I think would be really worthwhile to read. I think they're 3 fabulous books. Okay, one is written by Matthew Said, Bounce and Black Box Thinking, and the other one is by Anders Ericsson. This will be on the web anyway, but they are 3 brilliant books. They're books you won't leave down when you start reading it. And the final slide I want to leave you with, again, it's up in my office, and it reads, "Do not go where the path may lead you. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." Thank you.